When issue 75 of Sandman was done, there was one big story that I plotted and never told. There was a whole storyline that you never knew about. I talked with DC Comics about doing it, but their business department at that point wasn't prepared to talk to me about doing Sandman on essentially any other terms than the ones that I'd signed up when I signed my contract for Sandman in 1987.
You know, I've always been in a band and worked on an assumption that made a lot of sense to me. The way I ran my career and the way I ran the Dresden Dolls didn't feel like this shisty, strategic ploy to like social network and get close to our fans so that we could make a lot of money. We just did that because that's what we liked doing. Like, you spend enough time with your fans and they really know you and they really like you and they really trust you. And this sort of thing doesn't seem strange. It seems very possible. But then from the outside, if you haven't been following the plot, it looks like this kind of crazy phenomenon. So trying to explain to someone in a few sentences how I've spent the last 13 years of my life and how I've connected with every fan and been very, very, very close in a real way with my fan base is kind of hard to explain because it's a long story. But none of this is surprising to me, and it's not really surprising to people around me either. There's like this perfect alchemy of things happening where I got released from my label. I knew I had this great record in me because I knew I'd written all the songs. I did have it in my head, finished in a specific kind of way, like there was this sound I wanted. And when you hear the record, you get it and you understand. I think this album is the most personal and intimate and also the most poppy and mainstream record I've ever made. So the fact that I got the album that I had been dreaming about and the fact that this was really my first big independent release happening at the same time was great. I wouldn't have put this album out until it was fantastic. And I think actually I did wait. I had to wait until I had everything lined up and perfect. I had to have something that I was obscenely proud of before I could go to the whole fan base and say, okay, this is it. This is my first big one that I'm doing myself. Everyone come and help. I'm building and constantly getting more and more connected with the people who are coming, with the fans. And Michael, who's the drummer and also the tour director, and I are really excited to find like where we can push the boundaries of things that haven't been done before in terms of what the audience brings to the show. And that means like including technology and the stuff that we're talking about with the MIT Media Lab and, you know, really saying like, okay, we know you guys are game for it. Do this, send us this, bring this. And when you come to this show, you're going to see all of these things manifested in a way you never could have imagined. So we're really actually trying to make every city and every show totally unique to the people who are coming.
I tend to think that, you know, what you do is one giant interconnected piece of performance art called Amanda Palmer, which includes paintings, you know, getting a bunch of artists and paintings, and Amanda Palmer gets painted, and Amanda Palmer tweets, Amanda Palmer makes an album, and it all sort of ties in. But it's all about connection, and it's all about connecting to other human beings. The thing that's been weirdest for me was when I was writing Sandman, I thought it was very, very transient. I thought it was disposable. For me, the joy of comics was the idea of I'm working in a disposable medium, I'm working in a monthly medium. I didn't actually think that when I began it, that this stuff was going to be around. If you told me that 25 years from now, Sandman would be in print, all 11, 12, 13 volumes, whatever you wanted, would be in print, and they'd be collected in these huge, heavy absolute editions as well, and they would have sold all these millions of copies, I think I would have thought you were crazy. But what's actually happened is watching generation after generation come in to Sandman now. I realize I'm signing books for people who were not born when Sandman #1 came out. I'm signing books for people who are in signing lines with their kids who weren't born when Sandman #1 came out. A year ago, I was seeing online people saying, I have to go and check out Doctor Who because I know Neil has written an episode. I was going, well, that's kind of nice. Some, people see it and know who I am. What I get now is people I've never encountered before who have never read anything else that I've written, just coming up to me and saying, by the way, I just love The Doctor's Wife. It's my favorite episode of Doctor Who. Thank you for writing it. And I say, you're welcome, and just vaguely hope they'll pick up something else I've written. When I started writing Sandman, I was 26. I had no idea if this was going to work or not. I had this idea in my head. All I cared about was the joy of getting to the next page, the next panel, the next word. The idea that I had all these cool stories in my head and I hoped we wouldn't get cancelled before I told them. So that was really my agenda when I was 26. Will I get this story out? Now, there's part of me that goes, everything I'm writing, I'm imagining a hypercritical audience of roughly 15 million people looking over my shoulders going, oh, that's what Sandman. But then I think, the great thing about Sandman is from the moment that I discovered the internet and that people were talking about Sandman on the internet, which would have been like Rec Arts Comics DC, circa 1989, end of 89, what people were saying then never changed for the next 7 years of comics. All they ever said was, it's not as good as it used to be. And the earlier stuff was always whatever somebody had picked up first and loved. And it carried on with people talking about when Sandman was good all the way through to 75.
That's depressing.
No, it's fine.
It's just,
it's people and it's human nature. And the funny thing is now nobody knows that. Now people pick up the graphic novel books and they have favorites. They might like Season of Mists or Game of You or Brief Lives or whatever, or the kindly ones, which people hated when it came out as a comic, and now it gets the best reviews of all. So I take a long-term view on this. I almost don't care what people say when it comes out. When issue 75 of Sandman was done and the story was laid to rest, there was one big story that I plotted and never told because it didn't really fit anywhere. And it was a story that in my head I called Sandman Zero. And it was just what happened just before Sandman 1 started. There was a whole storyline that you never knew about. It happens in 1914, 1915. I talked with DC Comics about doing it 7 years ago for the 20th anniversary of Sandman, and we batted it about a bit, but their business department at that point wasn't prepared to talk to me about doing Sandman on essentially any other terms than the ones that I'd signed up when I signed my contract for Sandman in 1987. And the moment that new people were running DC Comics, the first thing they did was come back to me and say, okay, Sandman's 25th anniversary. Could we do that thing you were talking about for the 20th? And I said, sure. It's just been announced, and it made headlines all around the world, that I've signed a 5-book deal with Harpercollins. So in terms of books that are in the contract, I've got a book coming out called Tuesday, which is a little book about a panda called Chew who sneezes. And we wanted to sort things out so that I could write the sequels, so those are in the contract. A book called Fortunately the Milk, which is a really goofy, very, very silly book about the imagination. And then I want to do a sequel to Autumn and the Frost Giants, and I've started the sequel and it's all plotted. And then there's one more book in the contract, which is just whatever the next children's book I write happens to be. I think people are going to be going, how is he doing it? How is he doing it all? Look at him, something new every week. Without me actually sort of going, actually, it's like 4 years worth of work, but it's all happening to come out around now, which I think is what's probably going to happen. It sounds incredibly impressive, but of that 5 books, 3 are actually already written. And 1 is plotted and begun, and 1 is just sitting there out in space.